Sometimes fishermen have big stories to tell about the one that got away. And sometimes the things we make to honor fishermen's memories when they are gone tell a big story too. So this is a story about the greatest fisherman I ever knew, and how I took something that he made that brought him joy and turned it into something that I made for myself and my family that brings us healing in our time of grief and keeps his memory alive. My grandfather passed away in February of this year at the age of 90 years old, having spent the majority of his life fishing on the rivers and streams of the Pacific Northwest alongside my grandmother, his brother, 6 of his children, 10 of his grandchildren, and even a few of his 23 great-grandchildren, as well as countless family and friends. He lived for those early mornings, watching the sun rise up over the hills and filling the sky with color, while hip deep in a river, waiting to feel that adrenaline rush that comes with that sharp tug on his fishing line to tell him that he had a bite. My sister, cousins, and I would spend hours sitting with him at his special fly fishing desk, listening to him share stories of his fishing adventures. We were always fascinated by the way his hands magically transformed a colorful bird feather and some thread into tiny little bugs to trick a fish into taking a big bite so he could catch the big one. After he passed away, I knew that I wanted to do something special with his fishing flies for my grandmother and the rest of us that would allow us all to keep something of his that he had made and that meant so very much to him, with us, always. I created a simple heart shape out of MDF on my laser cutter to use to create a mold for my project, and I had to glue 2 together for each piece to make them thick enough for what I wanted to create. I didn't have any clamps around the house, so I used basic rubber bands to hold them together while they dried, and it seemed to do the job. Once they were dry, I removed the rubber bands from them and finally had the forms I needed to use to make my mold for casting resin. I used the Make-You Formbox vacuum former with their special resin cast sheets and heat shield to create my mold with my heart forms. It took just a few minutes for the resin sheet to heat up to the temperature for pushing down onto the vacuum former, where the air would be sucked out around the heart shapes and produce the mold I needed for this project. Once the mold cooled, I was able to pop the heart shapes out and remove them so I could get started on making my resin bases to place the flies in. I purchased a beginner resin kit at the local art store and followed the directions to mix it together, and then started pouring the base layer into my molds. Once that base layer was settled, I took the flies from Grandpa's treasure box of his creations and placed one into each mold, half filled with the resin. I then took the remaining resin and poured it over the top of each to ensure that the fish hooks would be fully encased in resin so that no one accidentally got stabbed while handling their Papa treasure. Once they were dry, I was able to pop them out of the mold easily and reuse that mold to pour more resin for another round. I wanted to make this first one extra special, so I went to the beach we used to go to with Papa and found a piece of driftwood. I also found some river rock beads, which I strung up on fishing line, and I used twine from his garden shed that he had used to mark his rows in his garden as the string to hold it all up. This project has been very healing in the grief process for me, and I hope that wherever my Papa is now in the afterlife, it includes a river, hip waders, and finally catching the big one.